Okay, in this exercise we have passive sentences that we are being asked to write in the active voice. So this time, in 15, I diagrammed it first and then I switched from active to passive. This time I'm going to go ahead and rewrite the sentence from passive to active. And notice your directions remind you that sometimes the agent, that is the subject, the person doing the action, may be missing. And in that case, you're going to have to add someone. You could use the word someone. You could say Barney the purple dinosaur for all I care. I don't really care what you add, but sometimes you're going to have to add someone to be doing the action. That's the problem with the passive voice, is that often it doesn't tell us who did the thing. All right, so in our first sentence, the football team was led onto the field. Well, the verb here is was led onto the field by the cheerleading squad. So our action is was led. And we want to ask ourselves two questions. Who did the leading and who got led? Well, the football team got led. That's why this is passive, because the subject of the sentence, football team, is also the direct object. They got led. Who did the leading? The cheerleading squad did the leading. Well, right now, cheerleading squad is the object of this prepositional phrase because we're in the passive voice. So if we're going to put this in the active voice, we've got to say, who did the action? Who did the leading? Well, that was the cheerleading squad, and we have to make them our subject. The cheerleading squad led the football team, right, onto the field. That is an active voice sentence. Squad, led, team. That's a nice, straightforward, active voice sentence. How would we diagram the passive? Let's do the passive one first. We would say, team, the football team, was led. And then both of these would be onto field, by, squad, the cheerleading. Okay, all right, this is for you, Emily. Onto field, the, by, squad, the cheerleading squad, and that would be the football team. Okay, so here's our active verb, but what got led? The team. So our subject is also our direct object. That's why this is a 7P. But then when we corrected it, our new sentence here, let's make that one, let's diagram that one. Squad, the cheerleading squad, led, team, the football team, onto field. Led them where? Onto field. The field. Okay. Subject, action verb, direct object. Very simple. So it's a 7, not a P, because the direct object's over here where it belongs, right? In our passive voice sentence, the direct object was in the subject slot. That is what constitutes a passive voice sentence, when the direct object, or the indirect object, if you have one, is in the subject slot. All right, number 2, the cheerleaders are chosen by a committee in the spring. Cheerleaders, oops, I said I was not going to diagram the sentence first, but since I started, let me go ahead and finish. The cheerleaders are chosen, by committee A when in spring B. Okay, so cheerleaders is your subject, but it's also your direct object, because who got chosen? This is an action verb, and somebody got chosen, the cheerleaders. Because our subject is also our direct object, that makes this a 7P. No indirect object, so I don't have to worry about that. So how do we make that sentence active? How do we make that active sentence? Oh, no, actually that one, oh, okay, wait, it says change these passive. Oh, right, I forgot. We're going from the passive to the active. Whew, sorry. I'm back on exercise 14. Okay, how do we make this passive sentence active? Well, the verb here is are chosen. So ask yourself, who did the choosing? Who is the agent for that action? Well, a committee did the choosing. So we've got to make committee our subject. So a committee, notice we lose the preposition here because we no longer want it to be a prepositional phrase. We want it to be our subject. a committee chose the cheerleaders in the spring. And that's a nice, straightforward notes. Committee chose cheerleaders. In spring V. A nice, simple pattern 7. Subject, action, verb, direct object. Okay. Number 3, the new reporters had been warned by the managing editor about late submissions. Had been warned. Who got warned? The reporters. Who did the warning? The managing editor. So that to make this passive sentence active, we have to make managing editor our subject, because he's the one, or she is the one who did the warning. So the managing editor warned the new reporters about late submissions. Okay. So how do we, let's see, we have editor, warned, reporter, so that's subject, action, verb, direct object. This is a prepositional phrase. We have no indirect object. That makes this a 7. That's the action, active form here. This was the 7P, because the reporters, our direct object, were in the subject slot. And now I shall diagram them both. Reporters had been warned by editor, the managing, about submissions late, and the new reporters. So had been warned, this is the subject and the direct object. That makes this a 7P. This one, however, this active voice one, editor warned reporters. The new, whoops, no, I'm sorry. The managing editor, that's what I meant to do, warned the new reporters, we don't need that, about submissions late. And that's subject, action, verb, whoops, pencil's wearing out here, direct object. So it's a 7, but not a 7P, just a 7. Right. Several apartments in our building have been burglarized. Apartments is the subject. In our building just tells us which apartments have been burglarized. It's action, right? Something got burglarized, but the problem with this sentence is we don't know who did the burglarizing. Up here we knew that the managing editor had done the warning. Up here we knew that the committee had chosen the cheerleaders. Up here we know that the squad had led the team, but here we don't know who did the burglarizing. And in such a case, you're going to have to make something up. So I might say 3 men, I'm just making that up, have burglarized several apartments in our building. Okay. So men have burglarized apartments. That's subject, action, verb, direct object. That's a nice good old pattern 7, right? Men have burglarized apartments. Which apartments? The ones in our building. 3 men. Okay, so let's make that, let's diagram the passive. Apartments have been burglarized. Several apartments in our building, in building our, by, oh no, so we don't have a by, that's right, this sentence didn't give us a by, we had to make it up. We said 3 men, so it would have been, if they'd chosen to put it, they could have said by 3 men, right, but they didn't. So we have a subject, apartments, we have an action verb, have been burglarized. All of that is the verb, the main verb plus the helping words. What got burglarized? The apartments. That's why we know this is a 7P. Okay, our neighbor's new computer was stolen last weekend. Computer. Can't write. All right, let's start that over. Computer. Fixation with that word. Was stolen weekend. Last. Last is not a preposition. The preposition here is on last weekend. No, let's put neighbor's here, right? Neighbor's computer, because it was the neighbor's computer, but it wasn't our computer. It was our neighbor. Our neighbor's computer, new computer, was stolen on last weekend. So subject, action verb, what got stolen? The computer. So since this is both the subject and the direct object, that makes it a P. And because it has a direct object but no indirect object, it's a 7P. How do we make it active? How do we make it active? We ask ourselves, what got stolen? Well, the computer. So that's going to be your direct object, right? But who did the stealing? Well, we don't know. Got to make up something. Somebody stole the computer. I'm going to say Fred. Fred stole our neighbor's new computer on last weekend. Those parts don't change. But remember here, I have a subject. I had to make it up because it wasn't in the original. Fred stole computer. I have a subject, a verb, an action verb, and a direct object. That's a 7. Number 6, dental floss was manufactured for the first time in 1882. Now there's a great pickup line. Next time you're trying to think of something to say to somebody to impress him or her, say, did you know that dental floss was manufactured for the first time in 1882? A sure crowd pleaser. All right, was manufactured. What was manufactured? The dental floss. So the subject is also the direct object. That's why we know it's passive. So the question is, well, who did the manufacturing? Who done it? Right? Who did the verb? Well, we don't know. Let's just say that someone manufactured floss. What kind of floss? Dental floss. For the first time, the first, in 1882. So that's our active voice sentence. We have a subject, we have an action verb, we have a direct object. That's a 7. But our original, dental floss was manufactured, was a 7P. It was passive. Number 7, the possibility of recession is being talked about, and talked about is part of the verb here, because to talk and to talk about something are two different things. Talk about means to discuss. The possibility is being talked about in financial circles. That would be possibility of recession. The possibility of recession is being talked about. Yes, all of that is the verb. Where is it being talked about? In circles, financial circles. Yeah, I got the V in there. Okay, good. So possibility is the subject, but look, it's also the thing being talked about. So it's also the direct object. So that makes it a 7P. No indirect object, so just a 7. But if I want to make it passive, I have to look at the thing, the verb is being talked about, and I say, well, who's doing the talking? Who's talking? Well, the sentence doesn't tell me. So I might say analyst. I don't know, financial analyst, right? So I'm going to say analysts are talking about, right, the possibility of recession in financial circles. Actually, I'd probably put in financial circles at the beginning of the sentence, because it's not that the recession is going to happen in financial circles, it's the discussion is happening in financial circles. But that's how you would make this passive sentence active. Analysts are talking about possibility. That's your active voice sentence. Number 8, Gabrielle must have been granted an extension on her loan payment. Gabrielle must have been granted. What had she must have been granted? An extension. That's what got granted. This is your direct object, right? But what is Gabrielle? Well, she's the subject, but she's also the indirect object, right? The extension was granted to Gabrielle. To whom or for whom? Remember, that's the question you ask for the indirect object. What kind of extension? Extension on her loan payment, right? So this is passive because the subject is also, the indirect object is also the subject. Action verb, here's our direct object. So it looks like a 7 because you don't see an indirect object down here, do you? But that's because it's passive and the indirect object is up here in the subject slot. So that makes this an 8P. An 8, not a 7, because we have both a direct object and an indirect object. All right, number 9. I know I'm not diagramming every single one of these transformations. If you have questions, you can ask me in class on Wednesday and Friday. I'm trying to get through this so I can get these in your hands. Number 9, the play was called a smashing success. Play was called to be success, or called as success, right? A success, smashing success. On the board, yes, okay. The play. So what got called? The play got called. So there's our subject, but there's also our direct object. It was called to be or as a success. So that makes this our object complement noun. So this is passive because the direct object is in the subject slot. It's a pattern 10, P, because it also has an object complement, which is a noun. How do we make that sentence active? Well, we say, who did the calling? Gee, we don't know. I guess critics. Critics called the play a smashing success. Okay, there's our active 10. So that's a 10, no P, right? Not a P, just active. Critics called play success. Doesn't say successful, that would be an adjective, but success is a noun. All right, number 10, the poison has been rendered harmless. Poison has been rendered to be harmless. All right, so that's an object complement adjective. That means this is a pattern 9. But is it active or passive? Well, here's our subject. What got rendered? Ah, the poison got rendered. So it is both the subject and the direct object. That makes this a 9P. And we would make it active by saying, what? We'd ask ourselves, what has rendered the poison harmless? I guess an antidote, right? So I would say the antidote has rendered the poison harmless. Okay. Less L-E-S-S. Okay. Antidote has rendered poison to be harmless. Object complement adjective. That makes this a pattern 9. And it is active. When we rewrote it, don't have to write the A, but I'm just saying it, make you see it clearly. Originally it was a 9P. All right, that's exercise 15. Happy to answer questions about it in class on Wednesday or Friday.